President Cyril Ramaphosa says that his priority is to get the grid to function properly to overcome the current series of rolling blackouts. Ramaphosa addressed the media following his oversight visit to Tutuka power station in Standerton, that's in Mpumalanga, earlier today. The visit comes as power utility Eskom resorts to continuous power cuts due to the failure to stabilise the grid and generate enough capacity. Ramaphosa says that more units at Tutuka would be coming on stream.
We all have to work together to address the problem of load shedding, and they are doing as much as they possibly can, dealing with big machines, big equipment that they have to properly streamline to generate the energy that we need. And sometimes these big machines break down, and the people though are committed to making sure that they are repaired, and we just need to enable them. We just need to give them the capacity from our processes, from the funding point of view, and enable them to get the work done as quickly as possible. Because what is important is to put megawatts on the grid. That is our main focus.
Meanwhile, Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter says rolling blackouts could come to an end by next week. De Ruyter says they're doing everything they can to address the challenges at the power utility, including tackling corruption.
We have already embarked on a wide-ranging number of initiatives, including the beefing up of our SAP system, our integrated enterprise resource planning system. We are improving physical controls. We have stepped up overt and covert surveillance. We are investing in technology to make sure that we get what we pay for. We are also managing our warehouses far more tightly than they were in the past. But I think it's important to emphasize that the lack of control that exists still in Eskom is the consequence of a deliberate era of neglect to enable fraud and corruption to take place. And of course, many people have a vested interest in maintaining that status quo.
Well, strike season is firmly upon us. There's been labour action in mining and trucking, Eskom and the South African Revenue Service to the threats of strike action in the automotive industry as well as the private security industry. While labour disputes should have at the heart of them the improvement of rights and remuneration for workers, sometimes those are eclipsed by what analysts say is the pursuit of personal or brand power by union leaders, with the possibility also of outside interests. And there's also accusations from Labour of exploitative corporate interests that must be held to account. The reality is that productivity impacts cost families and the economy dearly. So how can South Africa's employers and unions evolve the way they negotiate? What room exists for a healthier and speedier resolution to disputes? Mthimkulu Mashiya is the General Secretary of the Transnet Bargaining Council, but is also a vigorous commentator on solutions to protracted strike action. So Mthimkulu, thank you very much for joining us on the program. We really appreciate your time. I think it's important for us to set the scene. So let's talk about these two tools that we have at our disposal to change how negatively the management of labour used to be pre-1994. And we refer here to the 1995 Labour Relations Act and Parliament. Give us a snap view of how they were meant to work in the first place.
Thanks so much, Iman. It's great to be here. Yes, if you look at the stated purpose of the Labour Relations Act, right in Section 1, right at the beginning of the Act, it states very clearly that the purpose is to advance economic development, social justice, labour peace, and importantly, the democratization of the workplace. So the drafters of the LRA back then, it was very, very clear the intention was to move us away from the pre-1994 era of adversarialism, antagonistic exchange, even violent strikes, in order for us to build, indeed, this economic development. And sadly, as you have alluded to, we have no economic development to speak of. There's economic stagnation. There's no social justice if you look at the levels of inequality and poverty.
Right.
And there's certainly no labor peace going by the violent strikes that we have.
So it hasn't worked or served the intention around which it was created. We'll loop back to this point a little bit later on. But what you proffer inside the current context then is, workplace forums, which are used by the Germans, that could be an area of opportunity for us. How so?
Yes, I've spoken about this a lot in the past. If you look at the arrangement of chapters in the Labour Relations Act, especially the part dealing with what is stated in Section 1 as the democratization of the workplace, the model that was designed, that the drafters of our legislation had in mind, was the German model of works councils. And now the workplace forums was really designed to move away from adversarialism. I mean, that whole chapter is Chapter 5 of the Labour Relations Act, gives detailed provisions about matters for consultation, how this consultation must happen. Essentially, they envisaged a system of collaboration, not adversarialism. How that chapter is really arranged in terms of how it's encouraged, actually entrenched, if we were to allow ourselves to really do and reset and do in exactly the way that that Chapter 5 is designed.
Well, we'll talk about, in the current context, whether that is something the unions would want or not. But that seems to me what unions might say we're doing. We have the shop stewards there. We have people who are on the ground who take a view from members and then, formulate that into a collective view. What you're suggesting is a difference between the way it's currently implemented or the way we see it in action as opposed to what the LRA envisaged.
Yes. No, we need to be careful, Iman. Chapter 3 of the Labour Relations Act deals with collective bargaining. That area is still for the unions. If you look at right from the constitution of the country and then the Labour Relations Act, that's Chapter 3 issues. The issue I'm talking about, and that's exactly one of the serious problems we have, that in the nature of collective bargaining, parties unwittingly end up lumping together issues that are not really meant for collective bargaining. An easy example, restructuring. Restructuring is a specific matter mentioned in Chapter 5 of the LRA for workplace forums to deal with. And the democratization is that, Iman. Fact of the matter is the unions currently in the country represent just less than 30% of the entire workforce. So there's no democratization of the workplace if, therefore, the large majority of employees are not even unionized. The workplace forum is structured such that you don't need to belong to a union. Yes, union will obviously take part there.
This is so interesting because if there isn't that need, the question is, do workers know that there isn't that need? There is a representative organ or tool at their disposal which, precludes them needing to pay membership fees to any organisation. But it also suggests that there could be a far more lean and efficient way to resolve disputes in enacting that piece of the LRA.
Yes, in fact, that chapter on workplace forums encourages employers and employees to adopt ways of resolving their conflicts and resolving their disagreements. And my whole attitude is, by practicing what is there in Chapter 5 of the workplace forums, that can then cascade into how the collaborative system and structure of the workplace forums. It can feed into, when you go now to hardcore collective bargaining issues, that collaboration is the way everything should be done. Because, as I'm saying, since 1995, when the LRA was promulgated and it gave into effect in November 1996, look at where we are, and clearly we do need to hit the reset button and go to the original design of the law.
All right, so hitting the reset button and, using the description and this context that you've created, which already exists, that room for these work-based councils, in effect, or these forums, is the time of the union over? I mean, I'm also mindful of the fact, as you say, the representativity, is below 30%. Those numbers also seem to be declining. There's not a resurgence of trade unionism and the trade union movement in South Africa. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Are you saying that this is the end of their era?
On the contrary, any smart employer would encourage employees to join trade unions. I'm not for a moment advocating for the demise of the trade unions. I mean, a former unionist like myself, I would love the vast majority of people to be in unions. There's a clear role for trade unions under collective bargaining, representing employees in dismissal, disputes, and so on. But when we talk about skills formation, innovation, looking at exports markets, that's something that should be dealt with not in the hurly-burly of collective bargaining. It should be dealt in the workplace forums where everybody is represented. Clearly, the way the workplace forum works is that in the company, all occupation groups, if you have engineers, you've got accountants, you've got cleaners, you've got all sorts of people, they must be represented in the workplace forum, precisely to democratize the workplace.
All right, so how should workers move forward then? Because currently, the model's not working. We see a series of strike, and I often comment about the South Africa is only 3 months on its calendar, January, February, March, because we typically get into the scenario almost every year. There needs to be some innovation in the way that negotiating and collective bargaining is done, which typically is done in the old-fashioned way. There's kind of a lot of, hostage-taking in terms of the idealism and the difference between an employer and the trade union movement. How can this innovation take root, within the way that trade unions represent their members in order to short-circuit this need for long periods away from work and massive impacts to the economy?
You see, the sad thing, Iman, is we can't even say the workplace forum model has not worked. We've not even tried it. I mean, the workplace forum, a majority trade union must then apply for the establishment of a workplace forum, and then the CCMA will set up in motion.
All right, so that requires some legislative act or some formal act. So just walk us through that again.
Yes. The way it is done, precisely because trade unions were implacably opposed to the establishment of workplace forums. What then Parliament did to appease trade unions, trade union people like myself, I was also opposed back then. But they say hindsight is an exact science. Now I know that workplace forums are the way we should have gone. And when I spoke to the CCMA to ask how many workplace forums since 1995 have been established, basically none. And even the few attempts that were made were half-hearted attempts, not in line with what the structure of the Act says. The many amendments that have been done to the Labour Relations Act, Chapter 5 on workplace forums has basically remained unchanged. So it's still there, we just need to make use of it.
So the opportunity exists. Who needs to take it up then, Mthimkulu? As you say, the scales have been removed from your eyes and now you know better, so that's why you're preaching this gospel of the workplace for work-based forums.
I'm afraid when I speak to some of the union leaders and some of my comrades, in fact, with all due respect to them, I don't think we've come to grasp. I mean, I used to be a trade union educator back in the day. When I ran workshops, I never even referred to the workplace forum chapter because we didn't want it. So workers and even union leaders are blissfully unaware, in my humble opinion, of the potential for workplace forums. I mean, once you combine workplace forums with alternative dispute resolution mechanisms around mediation to resolve the differences, the benefits for now collective bargaining would be enormous in terms of how we move away from adversarialism.
Interesting and enlightening, and I certainly think we need more discussion on this point, but thank you very much for bringing it to the surface as a starting point to make this conversation a lot more widely heard. Appreciate your time. Mthimkulu Mashiya is General Secretary for the Transnet Bargaining Council, sharing a view there on how collective bargaining should be done and can be done in the current context.